morning. I'm back. The computer is working decently, not yet up to the magnificent performer it was before the hack, but in any event it's working and I'm able to record something and speak to you today. And tomorrow is the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. That was in 1963. It was organized when Kennedy was president. And Walter Cronkite, the great broadcaster, gave his evening news talk with a wonderful, vivid description of the March on Washington. And that day would become one of the most famous days in the equal rights movement. A magnificent attempt for the freedoms that many black Americans were deprived of. The original name of this march was called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And people came from all over America, Negroes and whites and yellows and whatever other color existed, they were all there. And it was housewives and Hollywood stars and senators and beatniks. Remember the beatniks? And there were clergymen. And there were a few communists, we're sure of that. More than 200,000 people came to Washington on that morning. A kind of a climax to a historic spring and summer in this struggle, the monumental struggle for equal rights, which still hasn't died in this country. And if you don't think so, just look around and pay attention to what's going on in many places in this country. And of course, one of the leaders of this march was the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., and he made his famed "I Have a Dream" speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial on the afternoon of August 28, 1963. And he spoke for 16 minutes, attempting to get attention of the entire nation, a rallying cry, in a sense, for all of those people who needed it, who needed to have equal rights. Something that we proclaimed forever in this country, but we know even to this day that it's not 100% true. Some of us are still more equal than others. Just think about the 50 million people who live at the poverty level or below. And think about the way that our Congress acts. And we can recognize that we need another march like this and another rallying cry for all of our American people. At that time, this march was in support of the Civil Rights Act, which President Kennedy was attempting to get passed through Congress. The act called for an expanded Civil Rights Commission and the desegregation of public schools and other locations in the South, mostly, and voting rights protections for black Americans. And we know that that situation with black Americans still exists today. Very subtly, but it still exists. And so on that day, 250,000 or more people walked from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial. There was great enthusiasm in the march, young and old merging together in a determined stance as well as a happy one. There was energy and exuberance and singing songs like "We Shall Overcome." It was a wonderful, wonderful event that took place in this country. An outpouring of the type of spirit that we desperately need today. The leaders of the march were not famous people in the sense that they were well recognized around the country, but somebody like Asa Philip Randall, who was 74 years old at the time, and he's the gentleman that was key to convincing Harry Truman to integrate the U.S. military. And then Eugene Carson Blake, who was a minister and a pastor to Dwight Eisenhower when he was president, and he was a union organizer. And he created the Congress of Racial Equality and organized freedom rides in 1961. So it's quite a group that was involved in putting this march together. And another one of the leaders of the march was the Rabbi Joachim Prinz. And all of these leaders met with Kennedy, spending 75 minutes with him. And there were other officials in the room. And Kennedy released a statement praising the march and praising its leaders. This march knew there was still a lot of work to be done. And after the meeting, the Reverend King told the assembled reporters that it was very clear that they would need very strong bipartisan support to pass any civil rights legislation that year. And that's what the president himself had told the whole group that was there. They would need a lot of help that year. And we know they did need it. And they still need a lot of help. So on this 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, there is an assembly planned for the Lincoln Memorial. And there's about 50,000 people who are expected to arrive at the Lincoln Memorial to pay their respects to King. And his son Martin Luther King III plans to speak. And the event will honor the past and acknowledge the present and mark toward a future of progress and equality. That's according to the event's website. And I think that's an awful lot of hopeful thinking given the state of the American country today. But let's hope it has an effect on some people. And let's hope that we can inch slowly toward the future, and maybe in another 50 years we'll get the thing correct. And if you think I'm being a bit pessimistic, just look around you. Pay attention to what's going on in this country, in this society, in the red and blue states, and you will see that we haven't gotten that much further along since the civil rights movement started 60 years ago, or 65, or 70 years ago, or however long it is. It's a blight on this country that it's taken so long, and it's a blight on this country that it's continuing in many places. And I don't want to be a downer, but we have to recognize that there's still a lot of work to be done. So I'll leave you with that this morning, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.